It makes sense, I suppose. So, assessing risk quantitatively. This area has a few main branches. We've got process-based methods incorporating probability. So while these are generally where you draw a flow diagram to help to simplify a production process or a set of actions or consequences from something going wrong, and then you can then either do that just as a qualitative assessment, you're breaking things down into the simplest stages in order to help to understand the processes that go on when something goes wrong. Or you could do this as a quantitative risk assessment where you add a probability at each stage. So I'll talk a bit about those first. Then we'll look at quantitative risk assessment in occupational health. So that's in epidemiology, best differentiated between the epidemiology looks at what is the risk of a disease in the presence of an exposure relative to the risk of a disease if you haven't had that exposure. And that contributes towards quantitative risk assessment. Quantitative risk assessment is a little more involved. Basically, what you need to be able to do, because epidemiology is much more retrospective, looking at generally cases of things that already happened. Quantitative risk assessment, the whole idea of risk assessment, is that we are able to make a realistic estimate of what is going to happen and take actions all prospectively or before it has happened in order to prevent harm. This prevention is the main thrust with this, and so for that we need a little more information. And so what we look at here in order to make our characterization of the ultimate risk, our risk scoring as it were, we need to know how many cases or how many excess cases of a disease will occur in a population due to an exposure at a certain dose level. Because ultimately, when you're in the world of work, there may be there's always going to be a compelling reason to make use of hazardous chemicals or to carry out work in a hazardous working environment, because not all of our working environments are safe ones. And so what we do with this sort of risk assessment is to try to say, right, well, we're going to expose people to a certain level of risk. How much exposure can we give them to this hazardous element before we then substantially increase their risk of disease? And so that's what we're driving at in general with this. So, quantitative risk assessment. What do you understand by the term quantitative risk assessment? Well, it's a quantitative or probabilistic risk assessment that involves calculation of numerical probabilities. So what we're saying here is we remove the judgment completely. It is all based upon numbers. In fact, the quality of the data which you use for your probabilities to work out your probabilities, that is where the problems come. And so the better the data that you can get, the better the quality of your risk assessment and the more accurate your calculation of your ultimate probability of harm. So commonly used in high technology industries such as complex chemical or nuclear plants, the protection of the environment, mass transportation, as I said, rail, offshore oil and gas industries are very keen on this as an approach, where more credible values, and this is it, more credible values of probability are available from reliability data or reliable data sources.